This morning's first reading is from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, 4 through 7. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. The second reading is Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 15. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another. And if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in the one body, and be thankful. This is the word of the Lord.
Today is the last of our sermon series, Summer of Love. We've talked a lot about love in the last month. We talked about how love is not selfish. We talked about how love is patient and kind. Today, we want to talk about love and forgiveness. Love is easier on the wedding day than it is on the day in which your spouse overdraws the bank account. It is so much easier when you're holding that newborn rather than the constant tension of a teenager. Love seems so much more natural when the tension is low and things are smooth sailing. Love flows just so easily when there is money in the bank account, no pressures from the world, and we are all well rested. Can I get an amen? Now, I don't know if that is the norm for your family. If I say, that is, then God bless you. But it's probably not the norm for most of our families. And it's not the norm in our friendships or our jobs and even the church. Instead, there is always someone or something that is rocking that love and feeling. We have been studying this love chapter, and along with the patience and the kindness, there are descriptions of what love is not. Last week we talked about love not being selfish, and today we're going to talk about love keeps no records of wrong. Will you pray with me, please? Dear God, I just ask you to give me the voice to speak about your grace-filled desire for us to be forgiving. Amen. To keep no records of wrongs. The Amplified Bible, which expands on the words, tells us it takes no account of the evil done. Love does not keep a grudge. It does not nurse an old wound. It doesn't seek revenge. Love is not resentful. And that is all wrapped up in it keeps no records of wrong. Now, the Apostle Paul is writing this to a church. And he's writing this letter to these people, and he wants to make sure that they have a full understanding of what he is saying when he says to be a Christian, we are required to love one another. I want to just kind of give you a little bit of a context with what's going on in this church. And that, why is Paul writing this? Why is Paul elaborating so much on the description? And he talks about the fact that we as Christians, we as people of God, we as the body of Christ, we need to be centered completely in humility and love. We need to stop taking the worldly ways of revenge and resentment. We need to stop dragging each other into civil court, and we need to work things out. And he takes a really firm stand on the matter. And he says, the very fact that you have lawsuits among you means that you have been completely defeated already. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? To combat the attitude of demanding the pound of flesh, instead allow yourself to be offended. Let it go. In fact, he is saying something that is probably one of the hardest teachings that God gives us. And he's expanding that idea of love your neighbor, and he's giving exact examples of their behavior, and I believe the behavior that goes on through the centuries and right up to today, and he's saying it is better to have been wronged and let it go than to be unloving. And he is absolutely, I can't think of any other word. I tried to look it up in the dictionary to come up with a different word, but he is flabbergasted by the way that church members are treating each other. Now, Corinth was not alone, so this wasn't just a little isolated situation, so it's not just pointing to that church down the street, but he had written the same thing to this small little church in Colossae. And he said, you need to make allowances for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. I was reading something yesterday, and it reminded me that even in Revelation and the letters to the church in the end times, it talks about the fact that we keep messing up. So likely, as we sit here today, we can count ourselves just as members of the Corinthian or Colossian church. And then we can look at Paul's words and we can choose to say, wow, that is crazy talk. Or maybe we can just kind of dig in a little bit, consider what he is saying that is in context for us today. You know, for us, forgiveness, courts, justice, that all kind of gets wrapped together. And so Paul saying it's better to just let it go seems ridiculous. I mean, what about being right? What about what is fair? I mean, we know that God is righteous and just, and therefore he does not ignore wrongdoings, and he takes those things seriously. We know that God doesn't want us just to pretend that things didn't happen to us or pretend that sin doesn't exist in this world. Because doing that, pretending, what that does is it contradicts the holiness of God and the righteousness of God. So it isn't not realizing that things are going on in this world. But instead, it is understanding that God has a plan when things go wrong. Keep no records of wrongs. You know, part of what a pastor pastor does is they do counseling at times. And often, we just do the beginning part, and if the situation requires, then we send the person to those who dedicate their life to that kind of counseling. You always know that you're in trouble when the session begins with, you have no idea what they've done. And it brings out that laundry list of wrongs. Do you remember that first week when we were married and he did X, Y, Z? And then it was his constant blah, 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 and on and on. There's a story about this woman who goes into that counselor office and she has her laundry list. Actually, she was so desiring to make sure that the counselor understood exactly what was wrong with her husband that she had written, actually typewritten, a manuscript of everything that had been wrong by her for 13 years. Can you imagine? Can you imagine taking the time to go through and do that? Immediately, the counselor could see the wife's resentment of her husband's many faults, and he could see her meticulous documentation, and he could see that what happened was that didn't change her husband. But what it did was it made her much more bitter. Keeping a record of her husband's sins made matters even worse. And what was happening was it wasn't harming her husband just anymore, but it was now creating bad health situation for herself. Now you might shake your head and say, well, that's an extreme, that's just one case. But I can tell you, in some way, we are likely all guilty in a little way of that kind of behavior, aren't we? We might not write them down. We might not have a physical list on our computers, but we probably have those records of wrongs. And I'm not talking about the records of wrong of the stranger who stole your wallet, or the driver on the highway that raged against you, or the things that come from us from the outside. More likely, our list is about those who are in relationship with us. Our spouse, our siblings, our neighbor, our boss, even your pastor. And we have put this list together, and we have our whole list of arguments against why we are justified for holding a grudge. And sometimes we even obsess about it in the darkness of night. What it comes down to, what that list comes down to, is unforgiveness. Unforgiveness, keeping records of wrong. What it does is it ruins relationships. Keeping a bitter record of wrong will undermine any marriage. It will poison your parenting. It will destroy your friendships. Keeping the records of wrong will kill a business partnership or any work relationships. It will upset a neighborhood. It will break down the church. Unforgiveness breaks down the gift of love and ruins that one-on-one. And it's tough to live your life with someone who never forgets. Often the person who is most harmed with the unforgiveness thing is the person who is keeping the records. Christian writer Anne Lamott puts it this way, and I thought it was such a distinct and clear picture. It says, not forgiving is like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. Can you think about that? Can you think about how that's playing in your relationships today? This week made me think about how many things I hold on to that I really don't want to let go of, because it kind of, in a sense, satisfies you to be right. And sometimes we want revenge, right? And sometimes we know, we're like, yeah, I know I need to give this up, but I just want to be mad a little bit longer because that's going to make me feel better. Sometimes we run into situations that every time we face them, it kind of brings up this old stuff all over again, these old hurts, these old feelings. It is so hard to continually take them and give them back to God. And so what is the opposite of keeping records or a grudge? And it is forgiveness. I am so grateful that Scott was willing to learn that song in 3 days, because I was listening and I was trying to come up with something that was beyond my words that would maybe stick in your head. Forgiveness. Paul says, love forgives. That's exactly what he means when he says, love keeps no records of wrong. Love forgives. Anyone with a child that they know that song, Let It Go, right? Let it go, let it go. Isn't she letting go of the things, the harm, the hurt of the past? Think about forgiving means that we need to accept human beings exactly the way they are. Love forgives tells us, and these are Paul's words, make allowances for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Make allowances for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Paul is not expecting that you can only be perfect and therefore that is the way that we stay in relationship with one another. But what he's saying is know that things are going to get messed up. And when you know that, still come at those situations with the characteristic of love. How many of the conflicts that we have in our life are not allowing the other person to just be imperfect? How many are because we think and say things we believe are justified, and therefore we can equally believe that the other person's behavior then is at fault? And Paul is questioning the church, and the question bears for us once again today. How long will we continue to be and see relationships fractured because of our inability to forgive? And essentially it comes down to asking yourself one question. Neighbor, siblings, employees at work, congregations. about myself. Is that situation, that grudge that I am holding, is it worth that relationship? Will someone and their imperfection divide us? Let me just take it one step further. Because a lot of times that makes it a very personal, individual, between you and me kind of thing. But how many of our grudges break down even bigger groups of relationships, like families and office places? And here's where it comes: churches. Forgiveness is canceling the debt. Forgiveness is releasing someone from the debt that they created by hurting you. Not making a record of the debt means that you're not going to continue to hold it against them. Love forgives. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't held accountable for their action. Forgiving doesn't mean to continue to allow yourself to be harmed by a situation. But it means that you are no longer resentful and you no longer are holding on and requiring payback. And actually, by doing that, you no longer will be a victim. It doesn't mean that there won't be consequences for wrongdoing, especially when people themselves won't admit to their wrongdoing. But we can't let someone else's behavior eat us alive. What we need to do is to take that step forward as Jesus taught us to love one another. There's a story, I don't know if it's true or not, but I think it's a pretty good story. It's about Clara Barton. Does everyone remember who Clara Barton was? She was the founder of the Red Cross, and she was considered the angel of the battlefield during the Civil War. And you would think that someone who did so much good, how could anyone say anything bad about her? It's like saying something bad about, Mother Teresa, right? But she had her critics like everyone else, and one day a friend was reminding her about something that someone said about her. And she said, "You don't remember when they said X, Y, Z about you," trying to stir up these feelings of being wronged? And I love Clara's answer. She said, "No, I distinctly remember forgetting it." It's about what we choose to distinctly remember to forget. So I wonder what would happen to our marriages if they were marked by forgiveness. What if you gave to God all that you've been holding against your siblings or your parents? Are we willing to let go of our list, whatever they might look like and wherever we have them stored? What would happen as a result? What would happen at work? What would happen in our neighborhood? What would happen in our schools? And yes, what would happen in our churches? Because I can tell you that many of the pews that are empty this morning are not empty just because people are on vacation, but because someone is holding a grudge against something that once wronged them in a church. Now, some forgiveness happens because the other person, the person who did the harm, seeks forgiveness. And that's when the person comes and they are repentant And you get to reconcile, and it restores the relationship. And it might not ever be exactly the same as it was before the harm, but it might even be better. When two people care about each other and are in relationship, you hope that they can come to that kind of place in the situation. However, sometimes that just doesn't happen. And so, even though you deserve an apology, you just have to understand you're never going to get it. And then the question is, how do we move on? And I believe in this case, it is Jesus who gives us the witness. Jesus' words on the cross tell us and teach us about forgiveness. That even when those who harm us fail to see our sin, we hear the words that Jesus spoke when he said, "Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." How can we put that in our lives? Forgiveness is not ever easy, but at the same time, it is never optional. It is an essential characteristic of being a Christian. Love is patient and kind. Love is not selfish. Love never ends. And love forgives. This morning, I invite you to just take a moment. We're just going to have a moment of quietness. And in that moment, I want you to just look at that cross. I want you to hear for yourself the words that Jesus spoke and know that each of you is forgiven. And then offer the same forgiveness to those who have done us wrong.